Welcome to Stories Junction. Let's begin today's story. My name's Jacob. When someone you love grows comfortable disrespecting you, especially in front of others, you owe it to yourself to walk away. I was engaged to a woman I thought I'd spend my life with, but somewhere along the line, she started belittling me in public, passing it off as humor. Every time I told her it hurt, she dismissed it. "Just a joke, Jacob. Don't be so sensitive," she'd say. It became a pattern, and I made a choice she never expected. For 3 years, Sarah and I were together. Our relationship wasn't flawless, but I thought that was normal. We had our share of joy, late-night talks, road trips, and inside jokes, but we also had arguments and missteps. I chalked it up to the growing pains of love, believing that working through tough moments was what made a relationship strong. Whenever we clashed, I saw it as a chance to understand each other better. One Saturday afternoon, we were at my sister's place in Portland for a family cookout. My uncle made a light-hearted comment about wanting to see some little Jacobs running around before he got too old. Everyone laughed, including me, but the remark lingered. It forced me to think about where Sarah and I were headed. I started questioning things I hadn't before, about our future, about what kind of partner she really was, and whether the love I clung to was healthy or just familiar. Sarah was magnetic, always the center of attention. She was loud, witty, and charming, and people gravitated toward her. Being with her felt like a privilege, until I became the punchline. She had a way of turning humor into a subtle jab, wrapped in charisma. Early on, it seemed harmless. She'd tease me about my old man sweaters, or joke that I'd never win a style award unless it was at a library convention. Sometimes she'd poke fun at my job as a data analyst, saying things like, "Jacob's not chasing wealth. He's aiming for a quiet life with a good book." In private, I let slide. But more and more, these comments came in front of friends, colleagues, or family. At first, I laughed along, not wanting to seem like I couldn't handle a little teasing. But over time, those laughs turned hollow. I'd smile, but inside I was shrinking. She made it seem so effortless, like poking fun at me was part of our dynamic's charm. I'm not the loudest guy. I prefer deep conversations over small talk, a cozy night in over a crowded bar. Sarah was the opposite. She thrived in the spotlight. She pulled me out of my shell, and for a while, I was grateful. But there's a difference between someone pushing you to grow and someone exposing your vulnerabilities for a cheap laugh. Social outings stopped being fun. They became something I braced myself for, never knowing when Sarah's funny side would turn me into the butt of a joke. One Tuesday evening, I decided to speak up. Sarah came over to my apartment in Seattle after work. We didn't live together yet. We were sprawled on the couch, half watching a show, half scrolling our phones. I set mine down and looked at her, debating whether to let it go again. But something in me wouldn't stay quiet. "Sarah, we need to talk," I said. I explained that her jokes, especially in front of others, didn't feel right. I gave specific examples, like the time she mocked my cooking at a friend's dinner party, so she wouldn't think I was blowing things out of proportion. I told her I wasn't angry, just tired of grinning through the discomfort, tired of pretending her words didn't sting. I didn't want her to change who she was, but I needed her to see that her humor shouldn't come at my expense. I wasn't asking for constant seriousness, just for her to stop making me the joke in public. She laughed at first, thinking I was kidding. "Come on, babe, it's just fun." "Everyone knows I'm joking," she said, waving it off. But I held her gaze, steady and serious. I told her this wasn't about fun. It was about respect. Her words lingered long after the laughter faded. She paused, her smile fading, and said she didn't realize it hurt me that much. She apologized, promised to stop. We ended the night with a hug and a quiet moment that felt raw but real. For the first time in months, I felt heard. Over the next few weeks, Sarah kept her word. She was still her vibrant self, still the life of the party, but the jabs at me stopped. She found other ways to keep the room laughing without targeting me. I noticed the difference, and it gave me hope. I started imagining a future with her again, one that felt possible without the weight of constant humiliation. But something told me to stay cautious. I couldn't shake the feeling that this peace might be temporary, that the Sarah who apologized might not be the one who showed up when the spotlight called. Little did I know, a single night would test everything I thought we'd built and push me to a decision I never saw coming. 2 months after our talk, I proposed to Sarah during a quiet dinner at a small bistro in Tacoma. It was intimate, just a handful of close friends, the kind of night I cherished, low-key, meaningful, no pretense. I looked at her across the table, her eyes catching the candlelight, and I told her I still believed in US, despite the rough patches. I wanted to build a life together, one grounded in mutual respect. She teared up, said yes, and our friends cheered softly. It wasn't a grand gesture, but it felt right, like a step towards something solid. Wedding planning kicked off almost immediately. Sarah threw herself into it with a passion I hadn't seen in a while. I'm not the type to get excited about color schemes or seating charts, but I showed up, made decisions with her, and it felt like we were a team. For a few weeks, maybe a month, things clicked. No arguments, no tension, just a shared goal and a sense of partnership. It was the closest we'd come to the kind of love I'd always imagined, one where we chose each other with intention. But cracks have a way of reappearing. We were invited to a friend's art gallery opening in Bellingham, a cozy event with wine, soft jazz, and a small crowd of familiar faces. Sarah had grown close to the artist partner over the past year, so she was thrilled to go. I tagged along, happy to support her and expecting a relaxed evening. The first hour was fine. We mingled, sipped drinks, and admired the paintings. Sarah was in her element, flitting between groups, her laugh carrying across the room. I didn't mind. It was who she was, and I loved that energy. I stood near a corner, chatting with a few acquaintances about the artwork when Sarah joined our circle. Her hand brushed my shoulder, and I smiled, thinking she'd add her usual spark to the conversation. The topic shifted to travel mishaps, and Sarah lit up. "Oh, you guys have to hear about our first trip together," she said, her voice bright. I braced myself, hoping she'd tell the sweet version of our weekend in Vancouver. How we got lost exploring the city, ended up at a tiny diner, and laughed over bad coffee. It was a memory I held close. But that's not what she shared. Instead, she launched into a story about how I'd gotten sick from a food truck's fish tacos, painting me as a helpless mess who whined like a kid in our hotel bathroom. She mimicked me, clutching her stomach, dragging out fake moans. "Sarah, please, I need you to hold my hand." The group burst into laughter. I forced a smile, but my chest tightened. She didn't stop there. She added dramatic flair, waving her arms, saying how she had to babysit me while I begged for ginger ale like it was my last wish. The laughs grew louder, but I was frozen, my face burning. I tried to play along, chuckling to avoid looking like the uptight guy, but inside, I was unraveling. She didn't glance at me once, too caught up in the crowd's reaction. Then she delivered the final blow. I swear, sometimes I think I'm marrying a guy who can't handle a taco, let alone life's real problems. "Send help." The group roared, and I stood there, the smile plastered on my face, feeling like a betrayal of myself. It wasn't just embarrassment. It was a gut punch, a reminder of every time she'd turned me into a prop for her performance. This wasn't the Sarah who'd apologized months ago, who'd promised to respect me. This was someone who thrived on the laugh, no matter who it hurt. When the laughter died down and the group moved on to another topic, I leaned toward her and quietly asked if we could step aside. We moved to a quiet hallway near the gallery's entrance. My voice was steady but firm. "Sarah, what you just did out there, it hurt. You took something personal, something I was vulnerable about, and twisted it into a joke. I feel humiliated." Before I could finish, she rolled her eyes. "Jacob, come on, it was just a story. Don't be so dramatic. It's a party, lighten up." Her tone was sharp, like I was the one ruining the night. I stood there, searching her face for a hint of the understanding we'd reached months ago, but all I saw was annoyance. I told her I was serious, that I'd asked her not to do this, that it wasn't about the story, but about respect. She cut me off, her voice low but biting. "You're making this a bigger deal than it is. I'm not going to tiptoe around you. It's a party, not a therapy session." I stared at her, the weight of her words settling in. I'd laid out my heart, told her how her actions made me feel, and she dismissed it like it was nothing. Without another word, she turned and walked back to the group, her laugh joining theirs again within seconds. I stood in that hallway, the music and chatter fading into a dull hum. Something in me shifted. I didn't follow her. Instead, I walked out of the gallery, past the paintings and the crowd, straight to my car. The cool night air hit my face as I started the engine and drove back to Seattle. My mind replayed her words, her eye roll, the way she chose the crowd over me. I didn't know what I'd do next, but one thing was clear. I couldn't keep pretending this was okay. I drove home from the gallery in silence. The hum of the car, engine, the only sound keeping me company. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary, my mind looping through Sarah's words, her dismissive eye roll, the laughter of the crowd. It wasn't just the story she told, it was how she reveled in it, how she didn't even glance my way to see the damage. By the time I pulled into my apartment's parking lot in Seattle, I knew something had broken inside me. Not love, not yet, but trust. I didn't go inside right away. I sat in the car, staring at the dashboard, replaying every moment of that night and every similar moment before it. I kept asking myself, how do we get here? Sarah didn't come over that night, and I didn't expect her to. Part of me thought she'd be angry I left without her, maybe spinning it to her friends as me being dramatic. But I didn't care. For once, I wasn't worried about how she'd frame it. I was done being the punchline. That night, alone in my apartment, I didn't sleep much. I kept thinking about the past 3 years, every compromise, every time I'd swallow my hurt to keep the peace. I'd always told myself that love meant patience, that relationships were about weathering the storms. But this didn't feel like a storm anymore. It felt like a pattern, one I'd been too stubborn or too hopeful to fully face. The next morning, my phone stayed silent. No texts, no calls from Sarah. I wasn't surprised, but it stung all the same. I went about my day, made coffee, answered work emails, tried to focus, but my mind kept drifting back to her. I wondered if she even realized I was serious, if she'd wake up and see what her words had done. By evening, still nothing. The silence gave me space to think, to really sit with what I wanted. Did I want to keep fighting for someone who could dismiss me so easily? Did I want a future where I'd always be bracing for the next jab, the next laugh at my expense? The answer was forming, but I wasn't ready to say it out loud. A week passed without a word from her. No apology, no check-in, nothing. I'd expected at least a text, maybe an attempt to smooth things over, but the quiet was deafening. It wasn't just that she didn't reach out, it was what the silence said. It told me I wasn't worth the effort to her, not enough for her to pause and reflect. And in a strange way, that silence was a gift. It gave me clarity, a chance to see the relationship for what it was, not what I'd hoped it could be. Then, on the 8th day, my phone lit up with her name. I braced myself, expecting an apology or at least an acknowledgement of what happened. Instead, she launched into wedding logistics, something about confirming the florist and finalizing the venue deposit. Her tone was casual, like nothing had happened, like she hadn't humiliated me in front of a room full of people and then ignored me for a week. I listened, letting her words spill out, feeling the weight of each one. She didn't mention the gallery, didn't ask how I was. It was all business, as if our relationship was just a checklist to her. When she finished, I took a breath and said, "Sarah, I don't think we're doing this anymore. The wedding, the relationship, it's over. You don't respect me, and I can't marry someone who thinks it's okay to tear me down for a laugh." There was a long pause on the other end, the kind that stretches into forever. I could almost hear her mind racing, trying to find a way to spin it. Finally, she said, "Jacob, it was just a story. You're blowing this out of proportion." Her voice had that same dismissive edge, like I was the one being unreasonable. I didn't let her finish. "I've been your punchline long enough," I said, my voice calm but firm. "I'm done." I hung up before she could respond. My heart was pounding, but it wasn't from anger. It was from the weight of finally saying what I'd been carrying for months. I sat on my couch, staring at the phone, half expecting it to light up again. It did. A few hours later, a text from Sarah. She accused me of overreacting, said I'd abandoned her at the party and ghosted her for a week. So why was I making this a big deal now? She wrote that I knew who she was when I proposed, that I couldn't expect her to change overnight. I read it, let the words sink in, and then typed a single reply. Please return the ring. That was it. I didn't engage further, didn't argue or explain. I'd said what I needed to say. Over the next few days, I started unraveling the life we'd planned together. I called my sister first, told her the wedding was off. She didn't pry, just listened and said she'd support me no matter what. I contacted the venue, swallowed the loss on a non-refundable deposit. I canceled the photographer, the caterer, even the hotel we'd booked for our honeymoon in Victoria. Each call was a small weight lifted, a step toward closing a chapter I'd thought would last forever. But even as I moved forward, questions lingered. Had I been too quick to end it? Could we have worked it out with more time, more talks? The doubts crept in, especially late at night when the apartment felt too quiet. I'd spent 3 years building something with Sarah, and walking away wasn't as simple as flipping a switch. I kept wondering if I'd made the right choice, or if I'd just thrown away something that could have been saved. The answer wasn't clear yet, but one thing was, I couldn't go back to being the guy who smiled through the hurt, who let disrespect slide for the sake of love. Whatever came next, I needed to figure out what it meant to choose myself. The days after ending things with Sarah were a blur of logistics and quiet reflection. I threw myself into tying up loose ends, returning deposits where I could, notifying friends about the canceled wedding, packing away small reminders of her I found around my apartment. Each task felt like peeling back a layer of the life I'd thought was mine. The engagement ring sat in its box on my dresser, a silent question mark. Sarah hadn't responded to my request to return it, and I didn't push. I figured she'd reach out when she was ready, or maybe she wouldn't. Either way, I wasn't chasing her anymore. I started noticing how much lighter I felt without the constant dread of her next joke. Social gatherings, even small ones, didn't make my stomach knot anymore. I could talk, laugh, be myself without scanning the room for when I become the target. But the relief came with a cost. 3 years is a long time to invest in someone, and the absence of Sarah left a void. I'd catch myself reaching for my phone to share a random thought, only to remember she wasn't there. I missed her laugh, her energy, the way she could make a mundane day feel like an adventure. But I didn't miss the sting of her words or the way I'd shrink to keep her happy. One evening, about 2 weeks after the breakup, I met my friend Ryan for coffee in Capitol Hill. He'd been at the gallery that night, part of the group that laughed at Sarah's story. I hadn't talked to him since, not out of anger, but because I needed space. Over lattes, he brought it up unprompted. Man, I didn't realize how much that night messed with you, he said, his voice low. I laughed because it seemed like your thing, you know? You and Sarah always teasing. But I saw your face after. I should have checked in. His honesty caught me off guard. I told him it wasn't his fault, that I'd been good at hiding how much it hurt. But his words stuck with me. If even Ryan noticed, how had Sarah missed it? Or had she seen it and chosen to keep going anyway? That conversation made me rethink my own role in all this. I'd spent years telling myself I was being the good guy by letting Sarah's jab slide. I thought strength meant staying calm, not making waves, laughing along to keep the peace. But that wasn't strength, it was avoidance. Every time I smiled through her mockery, I was teaching her it was okay. I was complicit in my own disrespect. Realizing that wasn't easy. It forced me to look at myself, not just her. Why had I stayed so long? Why had I convinced myself love meant enduring? The answers weren't clear, but I knew they started with me valuing myself too little. I started making small changes. I signed up for a coding boot camp I'd been eyeing for months, but put off because Sarah thought it was nerdy. I reconnected with old friends I'd drifted from, people who knew me before her, who reminded me of who I was. I even started journaling, something I'd never done before, just to get the thoughts out of my head. It wasn't about erasing Sarah. It was about rebuilding Jacob. And with every step, I felt a little more solid, a little less like the guy who'd stood frozen in a gallery hallway. A month after the breakup, Sarah finally texted. It wasn't about the ring. It was a long message, half apology, half defense. She said she'd been thinking about what happened, that she didn't mean to hurt me, that her humor was just how she connected with people. But then came the twist. She said I'd overreacted, that I'd thrown away something good over one bad night. She wrote that she was willing to work on things if I was, but I needed to meet her halfway. Reading it, I felt a familiar pull. The part of me that wanted to believe we could fix this, that 3 years wasn't wasted. But I also felt something new, resolve. Her words didn't hold the same power anymore. I saw them for what they were, an attempt to shift the blame, to make me question my decision. I didn't respond right away. I sat with the message for a day, letting myself feel the tug of old habits. Then I wrote back, short and clear. I wish you the best, Sarah, but I'm done. Please return the ring when you can. I hit send and felt a weight lift. It wasn't about anger or spite. It was about closure. I wasn't going to argue or explain myself again. I made my choice, and for the first time, I trusted it. But life doesn't wrap things up neatly. A few days later, I ran into a mutual friend at a bookstore in Fremont. She gave me a hesitant smile, then asked how I was holding up. I said I was okay, moving forward. Then she dropped a bomb. Sarah had been telling people I blindsided her, that I ended things out of nowhere over a silly joke. She'd painted herself as the victim, saying I'd never given her a chance to make it right. I stood there, holding a book I'd forgotten the title of, feeling a mix of anger and exhaustion. Part of me wanted to set the record straight, to tell everyone the truth. But I didn't. I just nodded, said, "That's her story," and changed the subject. I wasn't going to play her game. I knew what happened, and that was enough. Still, the rumors stung. They made me question if I'd been too harsh, if I'd misread everything. I wondered if Sarah really believed her version, or if she was just saving face. The doubts crept in, threatening to unravel the progress I'd made. I needed to figure out how to let go of her narrative and hold on to my own. Because if I didn't, I'd be stuck in this limbo forever, caught between who I was with her and who I wanted to be without her. The rumors Sarah spread lingered like a bad aftertaste, but I refused to let them define me. I could have spent my energy correcting her narrative, calling friends to explain my side, but that felt like sinking to her level. Instead, I focused on moving forward. I leaned into the coding boot camp, spending evenings learning new skills, losing myself in lines of Python and JavaScript. It was tough, but it gave me purpose, a reminder that I could build something for myself without her shadow. I also started hiking again, something I'd loved before Sarah, but let fall away because she'd called it boring. The trails around Mount Rainier became my sanctuary, quiet, steady, no one to impress. Each step felt like reclaiming a piece of who I was. About 2 months after the breakup, the ring showed up. No note, no text, just a small padded envelope left in my mailbox, postmarked from Bellingham. I opened it, and there it was, nestled in its box, glinting like a memory I didn't want to hold on to. I didn't feel anger or sadness, just a quiet finality. I sold it to a jeweler the next week, used the money to buy a new laptop for my coding projects. It wasn't about erasing Sarah. It was about turning something painful into something mine. Life started to feel different. I wasn't just surviving the breakup. I was growing. I reconnected with my sister, who invited me to family dinners without asking too many questions. I spent more time with friends like Ryan, who checked in without pushing. I even went to a few social events, small gatherings where I could talk without bracing for a jab. For the first time in years, I felt like I could be myself without apology. But the past wasn't done with me yet. One evening, at a coworkers' game night in Queen, and someone mentioned Sarah. They'd seen her at a bar, telling a group how I'd overreacted to her sense of humor, how I'd walked away from a good thing. The coworker didn't know the full story, just related casually, but it hit me hard. I nodded, kept my cool, but inside I was wrestling with the urge to defend myself. That night, I journaled about it. I wrote down everything. Her jokes, the gallery, the silence, the rumors. Seeing it on paper helped me see it clearly. Sarah's version of the story wasn't about truth, it was about control. She needed to be the one who came out on top, the charming one wronged by her oversensitive fiancé. I couldn't change what she said or who believed her, but I could choose not to carry it. I tore out the page, burned it in a candle flame, and watched it curl into ash. It was symbolic, sure, but it felt like letting go. Months later, I was in a better place. The boot camp wrapped up, and I landed a freelance coding gig that pushed me to keep learning. I started dating again, cautiously, not rushing into anything. I met someone named Lena at a bookstore event. a quiet woman with a sharp wit who asked questions and actually listened. We weren't serious yet, but being around her felt easy. No eggshells, no waiting for the punchline. She didn't need to dim my light to shine hers, and that was a revelation. Looking back, ending things with Sarah wasn't just about one night at a gallery. It was about recognizing my worth, about refusing to let love be a free pass for disrespect. I'd spent years thinking strength meant enduring, that love required me to shrink myself to fit someone else's narrative. But real strength was walking away, even when it hurt, even when it meant facing doubts and loneliness. That night in Bellingham, when Sarah turned my vulnerability into a performance, was the push I needed. It wasn't how I imagined things ending, but it was the moment that reminded me my dignity wasn't negotiable. Not for love, not for laughs, not for anyone. I'm still figuring out what comes next. Some days, I catch myself wondering if Sarah ever realized what she lost, or if she's still telling her version of the story. But those thoughts don't hold me hostage anymore. I've learned that love isn't about enduring pain to prove you're strong. It's about finding someone who sees your worth and honors it, even when the room is watching. And for the first time, I'm choosing a future where I lift myself up, where I don't settle for less than I deserve. That choice, painful as it was, has set me free.